Hello and welcome to another episode of the Career Reset podcast. So, in the last two episodes, I did a little series on feeling stuck with lack of progress and feeling stuck in what you perceive as being the wrong field. So I hope if you haven't listened to that, definitely give it a listen, because most people who listen to my podcasts and who talk to me, they tend to feel stuck, and in those episodes I give you really good perspective and tips. And I was thinking what to talk about next, and I actually realized I haven't yet made an episode on interviews, which is surprising because that has actually lately been the main topic. I feel like last year it was all about not actually being able to secure the interview invites in the first place, and this year I keep hearing that people are getting interviews, not maybe for every single application they send, but the interview invites are coming and they are unable to proceed. So typically they will be invited to the first round, and they are not going to progress to the second one, or they make it to the first round where they're actually speaking with the hiring manager. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the typical structure of interviews later, but that seems to be the case. And I know it can be very confusing to not proceed in interviews, and especially if it has taken you a lot of time and many applications to finally get to that interview. And then of course, you understand you still have to go through the interviews to get the final offer, but maybe part of you is already celebrating that maybe this is going to be it. And then it doesn't work out. And often the feedback you get from the company is quite generic, something like that they didn't think that you are the right match, or that someone else was a better match. And it makes it hard to actually understand what to improve. And because I think this year that has really been the main topic I've been discussing with my clients and people in general, how to succeed in interviews. So I've heard a lot of different cases. I, of course, used to work as a recruiter, so I used to run actually interviews. So I have a pretty good understanding of what typically goes wrong, what are the most common mistakes. And of course, every single interview is different, and I cannot speak on your specific case, but I believe from this episode you will get a lot of value, that if you implement the advice that I'm giving you in this episode, you will first of all have the awareness of what are the things that maybe have gone actually wrong in your interview, and you will have a practical tips of what you can improve. And if you are still in that phase of waiting for interview invites to start coming, then definitely listen to this one as well, because it can happen sooner than you think, and it's better to be prepared and not start freaking out when you get that invite for your next interview. Now, you may hear on my voice that I am still recovering from my flu, and I'm actually amazed that last week I recorded and edited an episode, because I had the worst cough I have had ever. My abs, my stomach is actually sore from all the coughing. It's crazy. I even took a COVID test because it felt awfully similar to when I had COVID, but it's not COVID, so that's good. And I feel like really most of February I have just been sick, and it is so annoying, and I tend to get very dramatic about it and feel like I will never be healthy again, even though it's been just like flu and some stomach flu. And February hasn't been my month, but even though part of me would just like to lie in bed and rest and feel sorry for myself, I, in the end, looking back, feel so much better that I collected the little leftovers of energy I had, and I've been showing up on LinkedIn. I've been having lots of intro calls with potential clients. I've been recording these episodes, and it's really great to be able to look at the month and see that, okay, I did not feel my best, but I still achieved a lot. And I am definitely not someone who believes in like overworking and pushing through some physical boundaries, but I'm really proud that this month I was able to navigate the balance of when I really needed to rest and when the conditions weren't ideal, but I could still take my computer to bed and do some work. So if you're also struggling this time of the year with different kinds of flus and viruses and stuff, and if you have a little child like me that usually tends to accelerate getting sick, so I am sending you well wishes. I hope you will feel better, and the spring is just behind the corner, and I believe I'm not the only one who's hoping that will give us a bit of a fresh start in terms of health and also in our careers. Okay, but let's dive into the topic. So let's start from a bit more higher level. Why you're not moving in interviews? Because either you didn't proceed for reasons outside your control, or you didn't proceed because of your performance. Basically, those are the two situations. And there is obviously zero point in trying to improve things that are outside your control. So in an interview, the decision who proceeds is based on not just how well you perform, but who were the other candidates, obviously. And typically when I was a recruiter, we would invite to an interview, of course, people who were like the perfect match, who in our eyes on paper, based on their CV, they ticked all the boxes, or as many boxes as it was possible to tick. But we also always invited a few, let's say, wild cards, or people who maybe on paper we couldn't see that they were exactly the right match, but maybe we could see a lot of motivation and passion towards that field and towards the company, either from the CV, from their LinkedIn profile, from their cover letter, or like something about them gave the impression that even though on paper they might not have exactly all the experience we're asking for, there is something that they might be worth getting invited to an interview. For a reference, quite typically to the very first round of interviews, I would say between 8 and 12 people are invited. Most commonly, we were, for example, in my agency aiming for 10 people. Now, there were roles that were very highly technical, highly specific, when that was not even possible to find that many people. And there were roles when we would invite more, but I would say 12 was the absolute maximum. So just as a reference, when you are invited to the first round of an interview, you might still have, in a way, only 10% chance that you will make it to the very top. But typically people are not just applying to one job, they are applying to different jobs. So the company is hedging the risk that they will lose inevitably some people in the process by inviting more. They are also expecting that some people after the interview will say, hey, actually this doesn't sound like the right job for me and I want to withdraw from the process. Somebody who seemed like the perfect match on paper will turn out not to be the perfect match, and there is just a lot of things that can happen on both sides, on the company side and on the side of the candidates, that the company needs to account for, and that's why they tend to invite within reason, but a larger number of candidates. Then typically maybe half of those people who were invited to the first round will be invited to the second round, and then with each additional step, maybe one or two, or sometimes even nobody will get dropped, and they will all proceed to the final stage. So typically you will have the first round, and this is very individual. Each company will do it differently. It works differently in bigger companies, in startups. It's different when an external recruitment agency handles the recruitment. It's different when it's done in-house and so on. But I know it's not very helpful if I tell you that it all depends and there is no advice I can give you. So I'm giving you some kind of typical overview how it might work with some slight differences. But typically the very first stage is called a screening. Recruiters don't always use this term to talk it to candidates. And this is the stage at which you would talk with a recruiter, with an HR person, maybe with an external. It's called screening because it's not actually a typical interview. It's just like a broad overview to screen, to check whether what you have said on the CV is actually true and whether some like very basic expectation of the job are being met in terms of your experience, but also in terms of your salary expectation, when can you start, the location of the job, because if the company absolutely needs you to start in a month and you have a 3-month notice period in your current job, then that is no brainer and they just cannot continue. So that's what the first stage aims to find out. And also the task is to find out why are you even interested in this position, why did you even apply, because in the modern recruitment your experience and competence matters just as much as your motivation and interest and passion towards the field. And already in your application it should be visible, and it very commonly is one of the first questions you are asked in the screening call. It's, in my experience, most commonly a phone call or a quick video call, maybe 15-30 minutes. It can be very, very short. And you need to remember that this first stage, it's not with someone who is actually experienced in your field. So you shouldn't even go in too much depth about your experience. And this is especially true if you work in any kind of technical role, which doesn't mean just that you are a coder or a developer, but it means if you are some technical marketer, that you don't overwhelm that person with a lot of numbers and data and tools. I see this mistake quite commonly, that when you get the first interview invite, you massively over prepare and you spend many hours researching the company and thinking how you could talk about your experience to the point where it's actually too much. And then for every additional interview, as the process is kind of dragging along, you are preparing a bit less and less. And it should actually be the opposite. So for the first screening call, you shouldn't need a ton of preparation. You should just have like a good awareness of what the company does. When I work with job seekers, they tend to apply for a lot of open jobs, and then they can even forget when they get the interview invite that what was this job all about, which is not ideal. And you should always save the job ad for the job that you applied for this case, when you then get an interview invite, that you can actually refresh your memory what was that job actually about. So you can already take first advice from this podcast, that don't over prepare for the first stage. Don't overwhelm the recruiter or the HR person with extremely detailed description of your experience. Just try to answer all these questions they ask within like a minute or two, giving high level general information. And you can maybe ask that, do you want me to go in more detail? And maybe they might say, yes, please do. Or they might say, maybe save it for the later stage. And then as the recruitment process proceeds, you can expect that that's the time to really go in detail and give specific examples of your work, and also having a better overview of actually what the company does. That also is required at the later stages. And at each of these stages, the company may simply decide that somebody else is a better fit to what they are looking for. Most often it's just the seniority or the years of experience, or for example, if there is a candidate in the process who has done the exact same job in the exact same industry, maybe someone who worked for the company's competitor. If you don't have that experience, you can make it up or anything like that. And every single interview is a super valuable practice for you to freshen up your interview skills and to practice communicating about yourself, asking good questions. It's always a networking opportunity to actually get to know the interviewer and the HR person. But there are things that are outside your control, and it's pointless to beat yourself up about the fact that a candidate who had better experience than you was selected. Companies make rational decisions. They choose the person that in their eyes will be the best fit for the job. And often people tell me that this job would have been perfect, and I always tell them, you cannot know that. You have only seen the job ad, you have only talked to one HR person. Maybe that job would be horrible and it would be complete sidetrack of your career. And it's not about being bitter about it or like that, well, that job would suck anyway, but you cannot at first or second stage of interview really know if that job would have been perfect for you, because there is a lot of things you do not know yet. You are selling yourself in your CV, and in the interview you are sharing the best of the best, and so does the company. They are sharing the best of the best in the job ad, in the interview, but there is a lot of things on top of that you actually don't know. So I completely understand that it is disheartening when you spend time applying and spend time preparing for interview and then it goes nowhere. It's very valid to feel sad about it, but don't add extra layer of sadness and annoyance by telling yourself that that would have been the perfect job for you, when that maybe really is not the case, and the perfect job is still out there waiting for you. And the purpose of an interview is to find a match, and it's also common that maybe something that will be said by the hiring manager or by the recruiter, you will find out that that job is not the right fit for you, that what was written in the job ad sounded certain way, but then the reality is a different way. Typically people get a bit raised eyebrows when there is a question in the interview, something like, is it a problem for you to work overtime, or do you manage working under pressure? And the people answer, but then later they think, okay, that was a strange question, why did they even ask that? So I recommend to ask it directly in the interview. You can say, well, of course, this is a senior position. I expect that there will be certain times of stress, but I would actually like to know why you're asking this question and how much stress and overtime I need to expect, because I have a family and I value my health, and maybe if this is a very big part of this job, then I might not be the right person for you. It's always better to ask it directly than making assumptions based on it. But to bring it to some conclusion, this section is that one of the reasons why you might not be proceeding is that actually already in the first stage you go into excruciating detail. Typically the recruiter will ask something like, can you tell me something about yourself? Can you just introduce yourself? But this is not so much part of the actual interview. This is more of a small talk question. So if you start giving them a very detailed overview of your entire work history, that's not a very good way to go. So think back at how you approached preparation for interviews and how much in detail did you go already in the first stage. And when I was talking about aspects that you just cannot control in a recruitment, I also want you to be aware that very, very often, candidates are not aware of this, but very often the recruitment just goes nowhere, like that there is some change and the company actually decides not to hire a person. And there can be many different reasons for this. There is not a perfect information flow in a company, and especially in big companies, some team decides to hire a person, but then some hire manager finds out and tells them, no, you're not allowed to hire a new person. Or typically the company will open the recruitment also internally, so people from within the company can apply. And if there is someone who's a good match, then they might actually prefer that person over an external candidate because they already know them, they trust them, the person knows the organization, so it's a bit of a risk-free hire. And I can tell you that when I used to work as a recruiter, this was one of the most frustrating things, that of all the cases that I worked on, in the end, I would say 80% of them actually didn't come to the final contract because either the candidates decided not to proceed, but in even more common cases, there was some change on the company side. So they actually decided they don't want to hire anyone, or they had an internal candidate, or they said they're going to postpone it by 3 months or half a year. Or the person who was leaving and they were hiring like replacement for them decided not to leave in the end. And the amount of work you need to do to make even one recruitment happen is crazy. And then when you're almost at the end, and then you just get one message that, hey, we actually decided not to hire anyone. And then I had to call the candidates. And of course, the company didn't want me to tell them this specifically because maybe it was due to budgetary problems, and they didn't want to build their public image around the fact that they don't have money. So I had to not lie to the candidates but not disclose the full truth. So when there are these weird situations that the company said they would get back to you within a week, and it's been 2 weeks and they are not getting back to you, most probably there is something internally happening that is completely outside your control. And then when the rejection comes in and when they say that they did not proceed with you this time, it might be also that nobody actually got hired. So there wasn't even anyone better than you, but the company just decided to not proceed. And that's again, it's annoying, but it's just part of the business world. It's not illegal to start a recruitment and then actually not take it all the way through, and the power is on both sides. Just as the candidate can at any stage, even at the very last stage, can say, actually don't want this job, I'm not gonna sign a contract. So the company can at any stage say, we're actually not gonna hire anyone. And if you are looking for a new job, I really hope that you are constantly out there and trying to get as many interview invites as you can, because a very common mistake I see is that people do a lot of work, they secure an interview invite, and then they tell me that now they're not going to do anything and they're going to wait how this interview process goes, and if they actually get hired, well then great, they're done with their job search. But as I said, the first invite to an interview means still 10% chance possibly that you will be selected. And then it's extremely tiring if you have stopped doing everything to then start back from zero. And meanwhile, if this particular interview just didn't go well and you were not selected, you already have other invites lined up, and it's not as crushing, and it's not as, oh, I need to now start sending applications again, and it's gonna be weeks or even months before I get the next interview. So if you take one advice from this podcast, be it that until you have a contract on the table, you keep sending job applications, and you will be very, very thankful to yourself, and you will be able to find a job much, much faster if this is your approach, instead of all the time starting and stopping and then being crushed that the interview actually didn't lead to a job and having to pick yourself back up and start from zero. And now let's move on to the things that are in your control and that you might want to improve if you are struggling to move forward in the interviews. And a good indication here whether or not the situation was in your control, which you can't always know, but how do you actually feel about your interview performance? It's of course very common to beat ourselves up and to tell ourselves you could have done better, which you kind of always could, but it's not always the most helpful thing to tell to yourself. But typically you can tell that maybe the confidence you showed in the interview and who you really are, it wasn't the right way you could have presented yourself, or you feel like you could have explained your background better, you could have given a better example. And common feeling is that you know you have a competence, that you would have something to give to this job, but you just didn't show it in the interviews. So this is something to really pay attention to. I think the best you can hope for, even if an interview process doesn't go the way you would want it to, is if you can tell yourself, okay, it didn't work out, I wasn't selected, but I know I gave it my best. I am really proud of how I showed up in the interview. I was on the spot, I didn't know the questions in advance, and I believe that I gave it my all. And if that wasn't enough, then I was just not the right candidate for this job. Because if you think of it this way, it is much easier to move on and not dwell on it for months or years to come. And it's quite funny, I often see with my clients when we debrief an interview that there is a curve that we start with, I think it went great, we really hit it off, and we were even making jokes and had a really good conversation. I think I gave really good points. But then as time goes on and you think more and more about the interview, then you actually start thinking that, oh, but that I could have explained better, and there I could have given a better example. And of course, now when you have thought for days about the question, you will come up with maybe a better answer than you did right there on the spot. But trust the initial feeling you have after an interview and don't let yourself bring yourself down. And then if it's been maybe a bit longer since you heard about the job, then you start doubting even more your performance. But think of right when you were done with the interview, what was the feeling? If the feeling was, this went well, I feel good, I didn't freeze or anything, I answered all the questions, then most probably it went well. But if right after the interview you have this feeling like, oh my god, that was really bad, I just couldn't get my point across, I don't think I showed a lot of confidence, I didn't ask very good questions, then maybe take some time to just rest it off and do something else, but then maybe get pen and paper and actually write down that what you could have done differently, that what specific question you didn't answer with your best confidence and how you could have answered that question differently. Because if the interview didn't give you a job, then instead of trying to forget it, it can get you an opportunity to get better for the next interview. So if from each interview you take one learning point, one thing that you can improve upon in the next one, you will eventually succeed and you will become a better communicator, you will become better at these like high stakes discussion for a situation when you want to ask for a promotion or ask for a salary raise. So there is a lot to gain, even if an interview didn't go the way you wanted it to. And that definitely takes courage to, instead of trying to forget a negative experience, actually look the negative experience in the eye and thinking, okay, what value can I extract from this? What can I learn from this? And again, I'm saying pick one insight that is too overwhelming for the next interview to try to think of 100 things you could have done differently. So instead, picking one and actually improving upon it in the next interview, that is often all it takes. It's small adjustments that I make with my clients, and interview debriefs are one of my favorite things to do with my clients. They sometimes want to jump on a call right after the interview and I help them to get into some neutral mindset about it, so to de-escalate when they feel like it went horribly, so that they can feel better and they can move on with their day, with their week. And when I do these debriefs with my clients, I think there are three things that most typically are the problem. So firstly, it is the way you communicate. We can call it confidence, we can call it, I don't know, energy that you bring to the interview. But before we even talk about some specific words that you used and specific examples you have given, an interview is a discussion. And even the most objective hiring manager, interviewer, recruiter, whatever, who really is there to find out what you can do, cannot be oblivious to how you actually talk. That, are you excited about the position or are you annoyed? Is this your 50th interview? Is this the 100th job you applied for and you're just annoyed and tired, and then you show up with that kind of energy to the interview? The interview is not very enjoyable for either side. That will definitely affect the result, even if on paper you have a really good experience. And I'm not saying that you need to be some crazy, positive, excited person, but you at least need to be in a neutral place. I was in interviews where a candidate who was, for example, unemployed for a long time, and then I usually was very positive in the interviews, even when I was tired, even if it was my 6th interview that day. I wanted to make it a nice experience for the candidate, so I joined the call and I was like, hi, how are you? And then the person just said, hi, good. And this like deep sigh, and that's not the best mood to be in. So if you are having a bad day, showing that up in the interview is not gonna make the day any better. So if you can't find good and positive mood in the moment, try to find at least a mood where that is neutral and that doesn't bring everybody immediately down. This is your chance to shine, and you don't want to kind of kill the chance by something in the end so simple like trying to find little bit of positivity and excitement to bring to the interview. And this also often showed in the way people ask questions. So asking questions is super important part of an interview. Many people tend to skip on this, like that is just some formality that the recruiter or hiring manager is giving you to ask, but it's almost one thing you are being evaluated on, what kind of questions you're asking. That's the way to show actually interest, to show curiosity, to show that you did your research. Of course, if you ask a question, sorry, what does your company even do? That's not the best. But if you ask a question, something like, I've been seeing from your social media that you're opening a new market. That is super exciting. I actually have a lot of experience with opening new markets. And I'm wondering that why did you, for example, decide to open the Spanish market, or why did you decide to go to Sweden, if that's something you can share, because that shows you did your research, shows your curiosity, and turns that weird interview dynamic where the other side is just asking you questions into a conversation that is enjoyable for both sides. Nobody can be completely blind to the feeling they have after an interview. If it was very dragging conversations, if I had to pull every single information out of you, then it will naturally somehow affect my judgment. If I had then a candidate where the conversation was flowing, we had a lot to talk about, they shared a lot of information about themselves and didn't just answer like one word answers. So and when I say how you ask questions, I mean, are you asking like in the example that I gave, or are you asking that I really want to know how much travel there is because I have small kids and I cannot travel? First of all, completely legitimate and a good question to ask, but the tone that I used in this and the way to ask is not going to leave a good impression of your performance. And it's good to think about what kind of dynamic you're entering the interview in. So I have heard from quite many clients, and I actually, when I thought about it, that used to also be my approach to interviews, that you see the power dynamic in that all the power is in the side of the company. They are the one who are going to make the ultimate decision about your career. And that is not the best way to think about it, to show any kind of confidence like that. There are some evaluators. As I mentioned, the interview is a discussion. It's an opportunity for them to see if you're a good fit, but it's also an opportunity for you to see if the company is actually a good fit for you. So just as much as you feel like they are evaluating you, you are also evaluating the company and seeing if they are the right match for you. And definitely the trend in interviews is that it's becoming a much more discussion of two equal parties, and not just that the interviewer comes there with a checklist of questions and like ticks or unticks the boxes whether or not you are the right match for the job. So entering the interview in some intimidated position and feeling like you are like less than, that is not a good basis to actually show your confidence. But they invited you to the interview because on paper they liked your background. They believe you have something to give them. You are not just some rando they met on the street and invited for an interview. So you have passed that like a first level. You don't need to prove that you have something to show. They could already see that from your CV, but now you have the opportunity to give another layer on top of that. Now you have the opportunity to expand on the experience they could see from your CV, and they thought that that's a good experience. So often people enter the interview with the goal to show that their experience is worthy, but you have already done that in your application. That is now a given fact that you are someone who is worth talking to and listening to. And now you just have the opportunity to expand on it. So don't think of it that the interview is there for you to prove yourself. It's you have been proven. That's why you're invited to the interview, and now you have the opportunity to just tell more. And also an interview can be valuable experience of you actually learning about a new company, learning what they're doing, learning more about the job market, what do they expect from this job. And there is so much information you can extract and use in your planning your next steps, planning your career, having better language around talking about your job, knowing your value on the job market. There is just so much on the table. But if you reduce all that to just either I proceed and so I'm good enough, or I didn't proceed and I'm not good enough, you are leaving all the value on the table basically. So healthy level of confidence is definitely something that is valued in an interview. People sometimes can go a bit over the healthy confidence and be almost too much, which is not something I recommend. So you are not less than the company, the interviewers. You are not more than. You are not there to teach them how they should be doing their job and how you're the one who's gonna fix all their problems. You are two equal parties who are having a discussion whether the job in question is the right match for both of you. So instead of telling you be more confident in interviews, just think of how you approach the interviews in general. Do you think of it like you're going to some school exam where you will be questioned, or do you think of it that you are invited to a discussion where they can learn something about you, you can learn something about them, and both of you at the end of the discussion will make a decision whether you want to proceed or not. And also be open to the possibility that even though the job ad sounded amazing, maybe what you find out in the interview will indicate that this is actually not the right job for you, which is a completely normal situation that can happen. Not every interview invite that lands in your inbox is actually for a job that would be genuinely the right match for you. And the lack of confidence also shows in another aspect of the interviews. If it's a good interview, then the only thing they should care about is your competence, not who you are as a person. I'm not a big fan of this like culture fit metric, because in my experience, being a culture fit just means that you are even like demographically very similar to the rest of the company. I used to work in a tech startup, so you can probably imagine that there was a lot of white dudes around the age of 30. So then when they did these culture fit interviews, you wouldn't be surprised that if it was another white dude in that age group and having the same education like everyone else in the company, they were deemed to be a culture fit, but that is just the basis for bias and that ignores any kind of diversity. So personally, not a fan of culture fit. Some companies still do it, and if it's done well, it can definitely be helpful for both sides, because not every company culture is suitable to every type of person. So it's good to make sure that it's a good match, but at the most basic level, it should be about your competence, what you can do. And as I mentioned at the start, if you maybe are this kind of wild card candidate, you might even be surprised sometimes that you got invited to an interview because you on paper don't tick all the boxes. But then in the interview, this is something you should not draw the attention to. So when I do my debriefs with clients, I want to know exactly what was the question and exactly what the person answered. And if the question is something like, do you have experience with, let's say, talking directly to clients, and you don't have that experience, the worst thing you can do is to say it. Basically, say it like this explicitly, that you say, well, I don't have any experience with clients directly, but, and it doesn't matter at all what you say after but, you have already planted the seed in their brain that you said this like negative statement, that they need to know you have that experience, and you say, no, I don't have that experience. So what could possibly follow after the but that would save the situation? Simple rule you can use in your interview is to never use negative language. And remember, as I mentioned, they invited you to the interview because something in your CV sparked their interest. Something made them think that you could be a good match and they want to know more. So why would you kill their curiosity and interest by giving them these negative statements about yourself? And it's not about lying. I never recommend lying in an interview. It will be found out and it's just not a good basis for a good working relationship. But what I do recommend is directing them to something that you do have. So okay, you can say, if they ask, do you have experience talking directly to clients? Then you can say, I was in client meetings, I was listening to everything that was being said, I was taking lots of notes, I was learning what our client team was doing. I was actually talking to the C-level. We actually, in my company, we had this concept of like internal clients. So when I was giving reports to our C-level, they were the clients and I had to present to them as if they were external people. And this is a skill, to be able on the spot to come up with what from your experience is the most closely related to what you are asking. But that is one of the things that you can take as an insight from each interview and develop upon. I think especially in the first 2 rounds of interviews, the questions tend to be very repetitive. So it's a lot about your experience, it's a lot about your strengths, what kind of team you worked with, what kind of results you achieved, what kind of technologies you worked with. It's not very common that you would be surprised by the questions that you are asked in the very early stages of an interview process. And if you are able to, in a way, pass these stages, then your chances are much higher to actually getting to the finish line. As I mentioned, most of the candidates are ditched in the first or second round, and then it's not uncommon that in the last 2 or even 3 stages it is just one person. I have definitely seen that happen. They don't want you to know that because maybe they still have some people in the background, like a plan B. They still want you to not show like with entitlement and fight for the position. Or it can also happen that even at the very last stage, there are still 3 people. Company might actually decide that they got such good pool of candidates that they're going to hire 2 people instead of 1. There is so much that can happen. I mentioned that there can be a lot of negatives that happen in a recruitment process, but at the other hand, there are a lot of positives. Even if you don't get this position, maybe you get rejected, but then maybe in 2 months they actually call you that they changed their mind and they would like you to start. So when the things that are outside your control intervene and it doesn't go to you getting a contract, if you showed a really good performance, if you were really good and memorable in the interview, there still are possible opportunities how you could actually either get another job in that company or just like be on their mind in case they open a recruitment in the future. So it's definitely worth it to give your absolute best you can in every single interview, because it can open so many different doors. And when I was talking about this downplaying your experience, where I also see it very often is that they ask you if you have, for example, experience with some type of technology or software, and you almost downplay it that yes, you have used it, but not to a very technical level. They didn't ask that if it's to a very technical level. They asked, have you used it? So why downplaying yourself? That is the worst thing. Like, an interview is not a time to play it small, to show your imposter syndrome, to give more information than necessary when related to you actually feeling like you don't have the experience. You don't know how much experience, how much technical depth they are actually looking for, why they are even asking the question. So if it's something you do have experience with, but you feel like you're not the world's biggest expert, maybe they are not even looking for the world's biggest expert. It's actually always better when it's this kind of question that, do you have experience with this kind of situation, rather than starting to over-explain when you don't know what they're actually looking for. It's good to say, yes, I have done that in the past, and then you ask, do you want me to go in more detail, or are you asking for a specific reason? Is this part of the job? And then you know much better what they're actually after without making assumptions. Assumption making is another big reason why you might not be going forward in the interview. So, for example, you assume that they are looking for someone who is super technical and you are not super technical, so you spend the whole interview trying to hide the fact that you are not super technical, when in reality they are looking for someone who will primarily talk to the customers and just has like the language that you can then also talk to developers. Or you know that it's a job in a startup and you expect that everything is a mess, so you keep repeating that you work really well under pressure and in an unorganized situation. But maybe this is the one startup where actually things are set up really well and there are really good processes in place and you are just confusing them. So you definitely do need to go in depth in an interview and not give shallow answers, but make sure you are actually answering what they are asking and you are not acting based on an assumption. And it's completely legitimate to actually, when they ask you a question, to ask for a specification rather than like jumping right to the point. For example, if they ask you, do you have experience organizing events, and you do have that experience, but you are not 100% sure why they are asking because it wasn't written on the job ad, you could say, yes, happy to answer that. It's actually something I have a lot of experience with, so could you tell me a little bit more why you're asking so that I can give you the exact answer you're looking for, or that I can give you the most relevant information on this. Remember that it's a discussion, and in a discussion you are asking questions as well, and that is maybe the last point, that really make sure you are asking good questions instead of looking up some list of 10 best questions to ask in an interview that the recruiters have probably heard 10,000 times. I used to get very bored when I said in an interview, do you have any questions? And the person asked, what is the onboarding process like? What is the rest of the process gonna look like? What is the team I'm gonna be working with? And these, like, I could see they didn't even care, but they just saw somewhere on the internet that that's the questions they should be asking. So instead, really think, like, look at the website of the company, look at their social media, look at the job ad. What are you genuinely wondering about the job? What is something that for you is really important or would be really exciting, and you, for example, don't see that? And if you are able to come up with a more creative question that is not these things that everybody's asking, and I hope nobody out there is asking, the first question in an interview is, how much paid vacation will I get, and do you have nice offices or whatever. I hope I'm talking to people who are on a bit more advanced level here, but if these are the only questions you're asking in an interview, that how much you're gonna pay me, can I work from home, and I booked a trip to Spain in June, so do you mind if I'm away for a month? Don't ask these questions in case you ask these questions. But as a next level to that, asking good questions is something that will make the people to remember you. That person asks really good questions. They clearly have thought about this job. They clearly are thinking about themselves in this job, and they want to get the right information. Recruiters do so many interviews that it's kind of hard to remember each particular person. And usually, if you are able to give something that makes you stand out, that is a super good thing to do. And asking very good questions is that thing that can make you stand out. And instead of having a list of 20 questions, you ask one, you actually listen to the answer, and then you have a follow-up question on that, or you have some additional information that, okay, well, since you are saying you're going to be opening your own e-commerce, that is actually something I have experience with, and you can tailor your experience and like position yourself as really the right match to the interviews. Okay, so those are the most common reasons that I see people not moving forward in an interview, and a lot of strategies that you can try. And if you have been in many interviews and you are not moving forward and you are starting to wonder what is wrong, then it would be really worth that we take a look at it together. So if you fill the form that I always leave in the show notes, we can schedule a free intro call. You can tell me a bit more what has been your approach, what is your theory, why you haven't been successful, and then we could work together and we can fix it. I have quite a short, to the point package to people who are getting the interviews but aren't succeeding in actually moving forward in the interviews. I give you different strategies. We can debrief on your interviews. I will definitely be able to tell you what exactly is missing in your approach. I also do these like a trial interviews where I am acting as I used to as a recruiter, and then I can give you feedback very specific what you should improve, because it's very hard to evaluate your own interview performance. I can help you with negotiating, so getting a salary offer that after doing all this would actually excite you, how to ask for what you want, how to do follow-ups on interviews, how to approach case studies and assignments. We can talk through all that so that you have your personalized strategy to succeed in interviews. And this is very, very effective, this work I do. You will see the difference in the next interviews already. So if this episode inspired you, if it sounds like something you would like help with, you're tired of figuring things out on your own, then fill out the form and we can get together and talk how I could help you with succeeding in interviews. Okay, this was a very, very packed episode. I hope you have enjoyed it and it has helped you with your interviews. So let me know if based on this episode you were able to move to the next stage in an interview. That would be super cool to hear. And I will talk to you in the next episode.